Welcome to Life's a Coach. Our mission is to empower individuals like you to take charge of your life, discover your purpose, and elevate your performance to new heights. Each week, we'll be diving into engaging discussions, introducing you to valuable tools from the coaching world, and giving you different perspectives on individual development. Whether you're seeking clarity, motivation, or a fresh perspective, we've got you covered. Again, welcome to Life's a Coach, where the power to transform your life begins now.
Welcome to Life's a Coach, guys. My name's Eric Clermont. Today we've got life coaches Avril and Almar in the building. How's it going?
It's going well.
Morning.
It is morning.
Okay, so today we're going to be diving into the topic of vulnerability. Okay, so again, we're going to cover all bases. We're going to get pretty broad on the topic, right? But I guess the first question I'll ask you is, what is your definition of vulnerability? Avril.
Ooh. Interesting. Wow. I hadn't thought
Can I
of
jump
that.
in and say that I just had a visual of standing on the top of a super high building
Mhm.
with no support and nothing to catch me, but just myself standing there
I like that.
with the fear of
Uh,
falling, but standing. Yeah, I feel all alone.
yeah, that's a picture of vulnerability. For me, the word that comes to mind is exposed. If I'm vulnerable, I may be exposed.
So that's interesting because I would say both of those, like even the visual and
Mhm.
the description there from Avril, I wouldn't say it's negative, but it's definitely not positive. I would say I would flip it and say the ability and openness to let people see the real you, you know, like to see people see like the authentic you. When I think about vulnerability, I think like no masks. But okay, let's
Okay.
get into it. Okay, so
Can
vulnerability.
I just
Go on,
say
please,
something
please.
on that? What I like about what you just said, Eric, made me see how both what Alma and I said actually get it. It makes sense in that. So you're talking about the ability to make people see you, right? That's what you just said, right?
Yeah.
Your real you, right?
Yep.
And if I think of the picture that you gave Alma of being on top of a high place, right? For me, I look at that and go, I'll probably be feeling scared and afraid, and
Exactly.
you know what I'm saying? So that's the ability for people to see me when I'm scared and afraid and all that. And when I spoke about being exposed on my end, I was like, yeah, even being exposed is like I'm showing people the real me too, what's and all, So it kind of ties into what you're saying. You kind of summed it up well.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
it's one of the main ways that we build relationships, right? Is through
Mhm,
vulnerability.
mhm,
That's what I've learned, at least. And
mhm,
it needs to be reciprocal in many ways, right?
mhm,
I think the interesting thing was that in past, even friendships, I think self-disclosure is a big thing. Like, again, disclosing certain things about your life, just when they come up, right? Like through friendships and why you might be triggered or, lack of communication, just a bunch of things, right? And we can choose then to um, either just go with the flow and just be less communicative, like, right, and ghost maybe sometimes, or we can choose to be vulnerable and communicate, right, and explain to people, okay, this is why this happened, right, and I think that can improve relationships, or they can kind of um, make us feel less close. What are our thoughts on that? On you know, what is the what are the pros and cons, I guess, of vulnerability?
Um, well, talking about, and again, one thing I'm noticing the more we're discussing this topic, I feel like vulnerability is actually a word that can also mean different things in different contexts. right? Because if we're talking about if an army is at war and they're in a vulnerable position, that's actually a negative place. They're
Yeah.
in a disadvantaged place. You know what I'm saying? And an army going to war does not want to choose to be vulnerable to anybody. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Whereas in a different context, I'm with my partner, we're trying to have a solid relationship, a lifelong. There are spaces where I get to be vulnerable with my shortcomings or my insecurities or what have you. So I'm also noticing that it's you speak about pros and cons. The pros and cons, I think they also depend with the context of which we're applying them as well. Because there may be spaces where I don't feel safe to be vulnerable, right? you know, um, and would choose not to be vulnerable, you know.
I really
And
like that you use that the reference of war,
mhm.
because granted we're not on the battlefield, but there are times that we are. I didn't think I was coming at vulnerability from a place of um, not wanting to be attacked, from I guess from the aspect of heading into battle, I suppose. And in that case, you feel it's frightening. But here's the thing that Avra, when you were speaking, prompted me to like, oh, in my current situation, I'm experiencing a lot of uncertainty, which is uncomfortable. In With feeling vulnerable, with being vulnerable. And I realized it's because my approach is as if I'm going into battle. And then I thought, but wait a minute, this is not a battle. But my fight or flight instinct is instantly to be on guard and to not let my emotions show. And then of course there's the when I do let my emotions show, then I might not be able to communicate what it is that I really want to communicate because, well, emotions sometimes get in the way. And that space in itself is being very vulnerable. And just now, my body is telling me to retreat.
So just before we started, you were about to share a situation that you're going through with family or somebody, and my question to you is like, now that we started talking, has anything shifted in the way that you feel about the situation?
It's funny, I didn't say it was family, but
Oh, okay, my bad. I
but
don't know why I assumed, I thought you were going that direction. You had
uh,
mentioned
but
a
but you are
situation, but
quite
yeah, go.
perceptive. Yeah. Um, yeah, so I have a conversation that needs to be had, and I'm having a very hard time, a very challenging time coming up with what it is I want to say and how I want it to be received. And of course, I know I can go over 100 times in my head, and replay it, but it'll never be because I'm just making all of that up, right? But showing up and knowing myself is frightening because I am almost certain that I'm not going to convey my true sentiments and my true thoughts because of the dynamic, the history that I've had with this person. And, but Avril, you just reminded me that this person is just a person like you. And if the tables were turned, I would appreciate the vulnerability coming from that other person as well and take it well, not take it as a weakness, but what? Strength? Not strength, because I wouldn't look at it that way, but just be almost touched and speaking to my heart instead of speaking to my head. I don't know. What do
I
you guys
totally
think
get it.
about that?
I get that. For me, I've actually got very fresh experiences in mind. as you know, the challenges I've been going through, that I had been in the past 5 months or so, I've had to ask people for help, right? Even financially, which is something I hadn't done for years. But even in that, there are all sorts of feelings that come with being vulnerable, right? Like you said some of the things, like it makes me feel like I'm weak, you know. Uh, there were all these things that, for me, were more what I made what I the position I was in. I made it more negative than it was. But the compassion and love and support I got from the people around me once I was open and vulnerable to share what I'm actually going through, that surprised me. And I even had a guy say to me, he's like, yo, why don't you flip it the other way? If someone you know was coming to you in the situation they're in and asking for the help they're asking, what would you typically do? Then I was like, knowing myself, like, yeah, sure. Them being vulnerable would just actually bridge the gap. If anything, there's nothing in me that will look at them in a judging way. It actually soften my heart more and be in that space with them, you know, and be willing, or to see if there's any way I can assist them in any way. Then it says, okay, then do you see how um, you not going out and asking help from the people that care for you or the people around you that you trust, you are kind of uh you're taking away from the blessing that they have, for the opportunity they have to assist you and help you, kind of thing. So for me, it was an issue of asking for help, but when I look at it, it also had to do with being vulnerable. How willing am I to bear it all and say, hey, I'm struggling here, or here's where I'm at. So those were the feelings that I was getting. And I had to be vulnerable, like, okay, God's down. I got to. And again, with that, I also must say that I wasn't just talking to anybody and everybody. There are certain people in my life I felt comfortable enough to be like, okay, I'm safe enough. Even though it didn't feel at times safe, it's like I'm stepping into something that's new for me. It's always uncomfortable. Should I say that's uncomfortable? But there are people I also knew that, okay, worst case scenario, if I'm exposing myself or making myself vulnerable, they're not gonna shut me down.
How did
So
it feel afterwards?
for me, I was blown away, to be honest. Like, the compassion I got, the kindness I got, the support, it felt very loving. It's like, in my mind, I'd built this thing up so big, but I feel like sometimes, even in relationships that we have, in our own minds, we put these walls and put these boundaries that are actually, I'm projecting them outwards, because what I received coming in from the people around, from all of it, from Eric, from Alma, and some guys from the Wolfart, it's like, it was such love and support that I didn't expect. And even those that didn't help me financially, it was just a talk, a chat, encouragement, what have you. It was just like, wow. Um,
Do
and
you think it would
again,
be easier the next time now? If I hope it doesn't happen again, but how do you think you will respond the next time now that you've broken the ice and ripped off the Band-Aid?
um, I feel like it's I don't know, the picture that comes to my mind is like when you're at the gym and you're lifting weights, right? So if if you started at 25, it's now that I have a history of, the last time, because I'm always in my head. What was stopping me was what I was projecting. But now I have a track record of, like, you know what? No. Last time I asked for help and this happened. Last time I was vulnerable and this happened. Like, I can now cement any contradiction thoughts in my mind that are trying to hold me back. I can now at least say, hey, but we've did it before, we've done it before, and this is what we came up with. This is the way we go. So I think, I don't know if the word easier, I can use the word easier yet, but I know that it would be less uncomfortable.
So like I like that comparison or analogy you made to working out, lifting weights. So if we can like share with all of our listeners that the first time is almost guaranteed to be frightening, but after the first gym session, you get a little sore, the muscles build, and you go again, it's a little bit easier, and then easier and easier. So the first time will always be frightening, but almost guarantee the second time not as much, and so on and so on. And so, Eric, what do you think, being not just a life coach, but also a sports coach, um, what kind of advice could you give our listeners to getting on the starting block for the first time with vulnerability?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, just been listening there to both of you, and I love it because I think that what I'm getting from you guys is oftentimes it's a pride thing as well. It's like our pride is sometimes holding us back from showing our true selves, right? We want to show signs of strength, and we feel, or it's been um, shown to us that if we if we show weakness, then that's putting us in a weaker position, and we'll be seen differently from that person, right? But I think we've spoken about this before, where what we really find is I think the whole world is fighting the same battle, right? So if we are able to show vulnerability and to show weakness, then we allow others also to show that light inside of them. I think that's like, it's like the 8-year-old inside of us who is, you know, worried and scared and fears being judged, and, just worried about showing themselves their true selves, right? And then when we show our 8-year-old selves, like, who's not going to act with compassion to an 8-year-old, right, who is opening up to them, So I think, as you say, I completely agree. If we open up more, then we allow others actually to show their own compassion, because whenever anyone shows vulnerability to me, it hits a chord for me. Do you know what I mean? I never ever see it as weakness. Do you know what I mean? So and I've learned that through parenthood as well, where you know children are not are not afraid to show them their true emotions, if they're upset, if they're angry, if they're whatever, right? So I think we can learn a lot from kids, right? Obviously, doing it in an adult way and in a healthy way, 100%. But to your question, Alma, I guess, how would I have a starting point, for somebody who has, struggled to show vulnerability in the past, and, perhaps they really need to have a specific conversation, or they just want to make this change in their lives. I think a first step is probably talking to somebody that's very close to you, right? That you trust. And if that's too much and you feel as if you don't have that, then having a conversation in the mirror, or even writing it down. I think that when you get it out into the world, right, in our head it's all jumbled, and we feel as if it doesn't make sense, right? It's going to be too much for people, right? Again, and this false dichotomy that we have in our minds, that we're not enough, right? But in actual fact, when we put it out into the world and we put it into words, that's the freedom that we're looking for. Like, it's not actually the other person. We're actually looking for our own acceptance of the fact that we're struggling with this thing. Do you know what I mean? I truly believe that. Do you know what I mean? So it's not even the other person's reaction that we're looking for. So if we can find a way to get it out into the world, whether we write that down, whether we talk to ourselves in the mirror about it, or I think the best case scenario is someone that you really trust and care for, and you know that they're not going to judge you, because I hope, I would love for, like, everyone to have at least one person in their lives, or I feel as if I have you guys, you know what I mean, that I can truly just say that to, because then, as you say, it just becomes a little bit easier, just a little bit easier. Like, one thing I'm interested to hear, because there's been I guess the story around vulnerability and how important it is with relationships. Can one truly be in meaningful relationships without vulnerability? Like, are you truly close to someone without vulnerability, without them seeing that vulnerable side of you?
Shit. That's a great question. Um, Wait, are we talking what kind of relationship? Like,
Any relationship, any any friendship, because I'm great, Avril, that you said that, because I feel as if friendships as well are only as strong as
as
the
strong as you know
vulnerability
the
that's within
person.
them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think this to me also goes to the space of being authentic, right? The degree that my friendship with you or my relationship with my partner, the depth of it goes to how authentic I'm being. And the part of being authentic is that vulnerability, you know. So to answer your question in that case, at least for me, I would say, yeah, the true depth and quality of that relationship, whatever the dynamic is based on, how willing one is going to be vulnerable. Because ideally, if I'm not willing to, and again, to go back to the old word I used, expose myself, whatever it is, good, bad, or ugly, that whatever I'm feeling, insecurities, if I'm not willing to expose that to my partner, to my brother, to you, then you're not getting to really see. I'm hiding something, and I'm putting a facade or a face, and you're not gonna see the you're not seeing the real that's going on. April, how are you doing? How's things been? It's been good. It's been okay. You know what I'm saying? Oh, it's all good, right? So you don't know I'm suffering or I'm struggling. You get what I'm saying? But I also get that depending on the type of relationships that I have, right? There are certain people in my life who, if they ask, April, how are you doing? I'm good, right? Because we don't have that relationship for me to go like, oh my God, this is all that I'm going through to give them the depth. So coming back again to the question you asked, like to specific relationships in your life, yes, the quality and the depth of that relationship is affected by vulnerability and authenticity. I definitely would say that the way I look at it. Alma, thoughts?
Yeah, I've got lots of thoughts as you were speaking.
I can see your mind is
You
going.
can see your mind. Alma, you're like,
Mom has this look.
you
Well,
got this
Actually,
look, Alma.
you were
dreamy,
coaching
dreamy
me.
look.
Actually, that's so funny. No, I felt like I was being coached right now by you. So that was really lovely. So thank you. Because I said I'm like swimming through this sea of vulnerability right now, or at least trying to jump in and with this situation. And I needed that. I needed to hear what you were saying. You know, it's really good to talk to somebody. I realize that I can talk to myself all day, all week, and all it does is just wind up the conversation and distort it. And if you're trying to head in the direction of vulnerability, it's so easy to like swim in the other direction if you keep it all inside. But I think talking it through, and in this case, I was just listening to you, Ariel, give such really uh, wonderful insights. I was able to pacify the defensiveness that I feel when I go over the situation in my head, the scenario, and all relationships are different, and all scenarios are different, and we're all very different. Um, so no, that's anyway. I'd like you to continue because I'm deriving a great deal of value from listening to the both of you right
When
now.
you misuse the defensiveness, for some reason, it took me back again to my army analogy or picture, and I was just thinking like something that we hadn't touched on that I knew at some point when I got to is like why people don't like to be vulnerable, why people choose not to be vulnerable. You know, there's a
Can,
reason why.
no,
Sorry.
I want to say there is a reason, and I'm thinking it's because we might have history with that person. We may still have to be in the same relationship with that person, but there's history, and perhaps the history has not been very harmonious. Perhaps there has been a lot of not very positive interactions. And so that can develop into a fear of not just speaking to this person, but being vulnerable. Because if it's always very combative, if that's your history, of course, it'll continue. Somebody has to change it, or else it'll continue to be a combative relationship or a negative one, or everyone has their description of something that just does not feel comfortable. Well, who's going to stop it? That takes a huge amount, not just courage, but of vulnerability. But if your history, if your learned experiences, it never turns out well, I especially if somebody you perceive as stronger than you, has a stronger personality than you, that tends to always win the battle, if you will, if you want to call it that, it is frightening as hell to go and like, I'm going to try again. Why? Because the last 100 times I always get put in my place and I'm unable to be vulnerable. In fact, the only vulnerability I might have is that I start crying and then there's no communication there and then you leave. How do you ask someone to go back into the lion's den and try again? But of course, if you don't do it, it'll never resolve itself. And that takes a lot more than just a desire to be vulnerable. How do you deal with programming?
Yeah. That's actually something that when I was thinking when we get to talk about the reasons people don't want to be vulnerable, for me, one of the reasons I was going to put out there is programming, it's conditioning. Going back to the 8-year-olds that Eric is talking about, that 8-year-old hasn't had as much programming and conditioning for them to be taught to put the defenses up and to you know, literally we have fathers out there that I know who tell their kids as if when they're going out into the world, they're going into war. So have your guards up and da 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 da. I so I say all this to say it is conditioning. It is conditioning that kind of makes us all of a sudden want to walk around protected. And again, in context, again, I say I believe there is a place for it. There is a place for vulnerability, and there's a place where it's not. Like again, in context, I was talking about war and different situations like that. But I feel like there is a place for it. And another thing that I feel like I've noticed in the past decade or so is the shift that vulnerability has become currency.
So interesting.
Yes. So having been a stand-up comic myself, right? Studied stand-up comedy and have watched over the past 2 decades what's been going on in stand-up comedy. And this has even happened in music too. I've seen it happen in movies and even people who do blogs. But let me start with these examples. Is that we started with humor that's just like slapstick, right? Things that are funny, right? And what makes a joke really land, and if you're in a comedy club and you have these jokes that really land, is because people can relate to them, or it's things that happen and people don't think about. But what I've noticed that's happened in the past 2 decades, is people have become more vulnerable with what they're going through. It's just being really authentic and pulling out the funny side out of it, right? And when someone's being vulnerable with what they're going through and in comedy, you find that we relate more because they're giving us a place to also go, I can relate with that. And now he's laughing about it. I'm laughing with it. It's like, I feel that, I know that, and I'm laughing with you in my pain. I even remember about a few years back, I think about 5, 6 years ago, or if not 10 years now, one of these famous comedians, Kevin Hart, he had a set he did called "Laugh at My Pain." You know, he literally said it, "Laugh at my pain," and it's that when you really look at it, is some of these people are now coming up as real as they are and sharing their lives and just bringing up the funny out of it. But with that, if you look at all the books that have come out in the past few decades, it's people just being authentic with their struggles right? With being authentic with what they've gone through and what they're going through. It's like people who are celebrities, people we know now we have an inner to see actually there are real people going through real things like dot 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 dot. And that vulnerability is what makes it relatable to the masses and hence its currency. Like I can look at a few comics who've really blown up and started becoming, and it's not for the money, but they've gone big because they're just being authentic and vulnerable with what's going on in life and how they perceive it, you know. And I've even seen that in music too, where people write songs about what they're going through and they're just being vulnerable. And that opening, you're talking earlier on that, Eric, about does the vulnerability have to be both ways or receptive kind of thing? I feel like even on that scale, this may be a bit extending it for me, but the way I see it, like, wow, this artist has written this song that's beautifully sharing their struggles with drugs or whatever they're going through. And that vulnerability just makes me connect with them on a level like, oh wow, I feel like I know them, though I don't, and when you hear people on podcasts and stuff like that, and they're sharing their stuff, it's that vulnerability to just share what's real in one's life, being authentic. And I've seen that a lot of people who's been rising in the past decade are people who are being honest and authentic and just sharing, being vulnerable with that stuff. And in the same industries, people who have not been doing well are people who still want to stick to putting on a facade. You can tell when something that's coming at you is like, he's just making that stuff up, or yeah, that I can relate to that. That's real. But that
Basically,
for me,
it's saying that we're all the same. We all have the
yes.
same struggles. It's the one love, and everybody might turn their nose up at that, but it's true. Aren't we all just walking? We're the same. We're all connected. We all have the same struggles. Not exactly, but we all experience. I
Yeah.
always say that the person with the greatest ego suffers the most, has the most
Oh yeah.
pain, you know?
I like
Because to
that.
think that, no, your pain is so different from everybody else's. No, that's what I hear you saying, Avril. And so for someone to stand up and say, I hurt just like you, you're like, there's a connection that is made. There's a familiarity. You're like, oh, I know you and you know me. And our favorite people, of course, in the world are the ones that seem to be just like us, right?
Any last thoughts, Eric?
I would just another question, because this is something that I dealt with. Is we've gone very far in one direction of the difficulty of showing vulnerability, but then there's the opposite side of the coin, right? Is like showing vulnerability too early or too soon, going too deep too soon, like I've spoken about. Can we scare people away? Like, does it take a certain amount of time initially in order to like feel closer and close enough to show vulnerability to somebody? And kind of how can we kind of bridge that gap, if that makes sense, right? Because I think obviously it happens naturally, right? But some people, maybe like with you guys, right? I've met Avril twice physically. I've never met Almar physically, but like I still feel very comfortable being vulnerable with you guys, So is there something to be said for your people are your people, right? I spoke about dolphins, right, in the ocean and how they can hear each other from miles away because they speak the same language. Um, what are your beliefs there, guys, with regards to, okay, if your people are your people, then you can show vulnerability and be close to them from day one, versus some people you probably have to warm up to? Or is it just a kind of scale? The more vulnerability you show, the closer you're going to be to someone?
Are you saying you have to be vulnerable all the time to everybody? Is that necessary?
No, definitely not.
I it's interesting because I feel like on the journey I've been in, I feel like I'm trying to be my most authentic all the time. However, it doesn't necessarily mean I have to be vulnerable all the time, you know. And going back to something you mentioned in your statement, Eric, about at least correct me if I'm wrong, but in the earlier on, you mentioned something along the lines of, is it too soon to be vulnerable or not? All right, like maybe you started dating somebody or something. I to be honest with you, I've been in a space where I was vulnerable and authentic, but that person that I shared with it to them, it was too soon for me to open up some stuff that I opened up to them. All right. And I also got to see when I reflected back was like, no, it's there's nothing right or wrong between what I did and how they responded. They're just a person who wouldn't do the same thing. And it was odd. It's outside of what they're used to. So it was odd to them. And if anything, that could have been a red flag on them. They could look at me and say, that's a red flag, because of the world they are in. But on the other end, I'm like, you can share. I feel like I'm sharing all this. You can share this. That could be also a red flag on my end of how they are being. But I don't, to answer your question, that first part you mentioned, I don't think there is too soon or too late to be vulnerable. All right. Again, it's if they are relationships, they take time to build. All right. So I'll say to me, back to my initial statement is like, as long as you're being the most authentic you can, and at the same time, we get to judge the room. We get to judge to judge the room. I mean, see the room and, see, okay, I've just known this person for a few weeks. Do I feel I can, open up and go deep on these kind of matters yet or not? Filling out the room. I think that's what I was looking for. You fill out the room, so I don't know if there's right or wrong or too fast or too quick to be vulnerable or not, but you fill it out. I mean, we find it easy to be vulnerable with each other here, but look at it. It's a relationship that we've built over time too. You know, I don't think the first time that, you guys, I came here, I was like, okay, first day, I'm ready to, we had to build that
We're all
relationship.
coaches though, and we trust that we come from the same school. And so there's a natural, well, an idea that we all have this kindness and this openness and this willingness because that's what we do with our
Hmm.
clients. And so you almost naturally feel safe because we're coming from the same school of thought, the same language, we speak the same language, more or less. So there
So
is,
in that breath though, that you kind of also supporting what Eric says, like once you find your people, you found your people. Is that
right,
it?
because there is a trust. But
Hmm.
you can be, let's say, if like in a family, and they're your
Hmm.
people, but you might all
Hmm.
speak different languages.
Like, nice. I like that. Yeah, that for sure.
So it
For
takes time.
sure.
And Avril, on your stand up, you know how to read the room. You don't get the punchline too soon. You
Yeah.
gauge it. There's rapport,
Hmm.
and you figure out,
Hmm.
okay, now timing is
Yeah.
everything. And then,
Yeah.
of course, if you're not comfortable, Eric being vulnerable at the beginning, maybe you just kind of tippy toe. But at the end, what Avril said, the word I think is just being honest. Honest with yourself where you're at, how you're feeling. I'm not feeling like being super vulnerable right now. I'm going to honor that, and that's being really honest. Um, but I can just, yeah, I don't know. I just think just being honest, and I don't mean diarrhea of the mouth honest. I mean just honest with where you're at right now.
Yeah.
It's-
If I can say one more last thing on my end in regards to the reciprocation of vulnerability. I've been in a relationship before where I felt like I was bearing all, right? And that person, I could tell I'm not getting as much as I'm giving out, right? Like I'm giving three quarters and I'm getting a quarter back, right? I've been in a relationship like that before, and it does feel you feel exposed. You feel like you're two people in a room, and all of a sudden, I'm naked. I'm totally naked, and that person's dressed. There's that like, wait, there's all this openness and vulnerability exposed, and all this stuff I'm showing, and I'm getting nothing on your end. So I also know how that feels. And I also want to put it out there that I get it that some of our clients or people are looking into coaching, they may be coming from those spaces where they're finding it hard to be vulnerable. They would want to, but they find it hard because whatever dynamics they have going on. And also the conditioning they've had since they were kids that, you need to be cover yourself, put that tough experience, don't let people in, where this. That's how you're gonna survive in the world. You know, people can use what you share with you to their advantage. There are all these things that are people put out there. So again, as much as I one and we are advocating vulnerability, I also say it comes with wisdom as well, to apply it, know when to apply it, where to be vulnerable, you know where to be vulnerable, with whom you will be vulnerable, and just do your best to be your most authentic self. I think that would be my last thoughts on that. hmm
Fantastic. Yeah, so I agree with everything Avril said. I think there's a certain element of self-awareness and self-reflection. I think that's probably the first step in order to have more vulnerability in your life, right? Is first of all, you really need to know yourself, or begin to start that process, because I think, there's, experience, right? And we can, 20 years experience could be, you know, 20 years of 1 year experience, the same, where we're not learning at all, right? Or it could be, 20 years of growth where each year you are learning from your past mistakes, right? So there's a different trajectory there with regards to your life. So I think that one thing that has been super important to me has been some type of journaling. I feel as if when the thoughts are in my head, they're very jumbled, and they repeat themselves, and they don't get a chance for real direction. So intentionality in the morning with regards to, first of all, trying to figure out what it is, just reminding myself of what direction I'm going in today, what I'm grateful for. And then at the end of the day, what did I learn? How am I going to be better tomorrow? These types of questions really force you to think. And sometimes it may be as little as, I learned, that, this week I said something like, look, this juxtaposition between gratitude and attitude of gratitude, but also, this thought process of hope, of wanting a better life for yourself and moving in a direction. That juxtaposition can sometimes get clouded for, if I'm always thinking of the future, then I'm not grateful for what I have now, right? But I basically put down in writing, because I would kind of be in this in-between place, right? And I basically said, like, it's okay. But I learned that it's okay for me to be so grateful and thankful for the things that I have and the way my life is right now, but still want my life to be better in many different ways, right? So that, little nuggets of wisdom, I think, come from just that self-awareness and reflection of your day. So yeah, I would definitely encourage that as the first step. And Alma?
Oh, I think I already told you what I think. Baby steps, one step at a time. Just be honest where you are. I think talking with somebody is super helpful, especially in practicing vulnerability and practicing those conversations. And I think, like Avril, like his example, once you have that conversation the first time, it just gets easier and it becomes a practice. But having that first one is important. If that relationship is really important to you, then you'll find a way. I believe we'll all find a way if we really want to. And in the meantime, find someone to talk to that you trust.
Fantastic.
Yeah, nice safe place. Anyhow.
Okay, thanks so much, guys. Thanks for dabbling in vulnerability. Listeners, please do give us a follow on all our socials and let us know what you struggle with most in vulnerability and what action you're going to take. Until next time, Avril, Almar, see ya.
Yep, see you later.
Next time. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Life's a Coach, where our conversations aim to empower and support your personal growth. Until next time, remember that personal development is ongoing, so keep exploring, keep learning, and keep living a life that aligns with your true purpose. Take care, and we'll see you on the next episode of Life's a Coach.